currently, we want to change the kind of stories we tell to each other because we want to make a change to the world through the stories. But that's one of the things that we do believe a lot in, that if we just change how people are told stories, they will change their psychology. And that's not really necessarily true. A lot of campaigns to change attitudes backfire and do not work within health psychology. The laws against smoking in Europe changed smoking behavior overnight, where one had public health campaigns for many decades having no effect whatsoever. The amount of anorexia in Europe hasn't changed much since 1940s, 50s, despite models on billboards changing sizes for every trend. So there are some bioaesthetics here, questions of what we find most attractive. And most males find curves and signs of reproductive fitness and fat reserves, subcutaneous fat reserves, more attractive than women who are sexually competing against each other for thinness. And if you look at models in gentlemen's magazines, you'll see that they are more buxom than models in women's magazines who are a lot thinner. And the same happens for men. Young men today compete for muscle mass and really seem to be pretty naive about how uninteresting many women find excessive muscle mass. And it's also a sign of narcissism. And I suppose in our evolutionary past, any man with that kind of muscle mass hasn't just eaten all of the food in the village, he's also eaten some of the babies, I suppose.
Wow. Do you think that the release of human sexuality from reproduction is going to accelerate changes that have held for a long time?
One of the problems with the pill is that one of the consequences, according to some of the work, reduces sexual interest. So it's like you can now have sex without pregnancy, but you might not want to have it after all. So that is one aspect. Condoms should be, given the health benefits, a lot more popular than they are. And still, the slightest disturbance to sexual gratification seems to make them a little less attractive. So I'd say we haven't fully managed to free ourselves completely from reproduction. Another important thing from my perspective is that many, or almost most of our sexual choices are really governed by our past reproductive physiology. So women might be very sexually liberal, but due to evolutionary past, having sex with strangers just for the fun of it is both a little dangerous, it's not necessarily very gratifying, and it does carry the risk of pregnancy. So even in a situation that is safe and one knows what one wants, one might choose not to do so. So I think this idea of humans being entirely freed from their human nature is not very scientific.
I suppose the question is how difficult it is to study something that's happening in the moment.
Oh, impossible, according to Heisenberg.
Uh,
There's clearly changes that are happening on Earth that will lead to perhaps a different future.
Less
From
reproduction, you mean?
there's definitely less reproduction. Populations might start to plateau, if not fall, for the first time in what,
A while.
5, 6, 7,000 years?
Well, yeah, I love Japanese and Italians, but we seem to be losing them.
Exactly. So it seems like the Earth is coming for a new, different phase, a phase of stability rather than exponential growth.
But first, we have to manage to get past a super high population. So, actually, at the current moment, in many westernized cultures or many developed countries, and we see this even in cities in developing countries too. Number of children declines pretty swiftly after one has a financial security or a security for survival of offspring. But we we still have such a large population growth on the planet that one of the greatest challenges for our environment is population growth. But one of the one of the important lessons that we seem to be learning is that we might it might become precarious, but once we've passed a certain point, there seems to be such progress in the world that we might be able to see a decline in population after that. So first there might be trouble, but thereafter there might be some hope.
From an evolutionary science perspective, what do you think is the central question that faces humans right now?
From an existential standpoint?
From a scientific standpoint. As an evolutionary psychologist, what do you think is the central question?
Oh, we've got some problems that we need to overcome. So our minds are not evolved to take care of everyone or the future or even the planet. So we haven't evolved to be able to make that kind of decision that we need to make sure that we take care of life on this planet, the planet itself. So there are limits to our ability to not be here and now and actually make the best choices for the future. One of the greatest challenges for the environment is going to be overpopulation in a few decades' time, but then maybe that will sort itself out. Another problem is societies with too many men compared to women, so an operational sex ratio which increases competition among males, which often then will be disenfranchised males. Uh, this creates more volatile and violent and expansive or colonizing traditions, both for Portugal and for the Vikings. But we've got two countries, two nuclear powers that, due to selective abortion recent decades, now have a surplus of men both in India and in China. So we've got quite a lot of international trouble brewing based upon human evolutionary psychology. So in developing countries, they're going to want to have more babies than what maybe our planet can cope with. And in Western countries, we're going to have a decline of children because we're so well off, we don't need to. And at the same time, we're not going to be able to compute intuitively what we need to take care of the environment. And some places we might have devastating wars instead of peace and progress.